Welcome to a place where family smiles hide sharp knives, and silence speaks louder than screams. Here, every story begins with trust and ends with truth. What looks like love often masks control. What feels like loyalty slowly turns into betrayal. These are stories where power plays turn ugly, where husbands shout the loudest because they fear being exposed, and where quiet strength waits patiently for the perfect moment. You'll hear about beach houses stolen in plain sight, money moved behind closed doors, and family dinners that quietly destroy marriages. No fairy tales here, only raw emotions, calculated silence, and nights that change everything by sunrise. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or betrayed by someone who thought you'd never fight back, these stories are for you. Stay close because every episode reveals how arrogance collapses when secrets finally surface. The beach house had always been a quiet refuge, a place tied to childhood summers and unspoken promises. That evening began the same way: soft waves, familiar laughter, the illusion of family harmony. Everyone acted comfortable, but tension lived just beneath the surface, especially in the way a sister's husband watched everything like it already belonged to him. Dinner ended with wine glasses half full and eagles completely inflated. The shift happened fast. One sharp comment turned into a command, loud enough to silence the room. A finger pointed toward the door, and the words followed, cold, entitled, and cruel. The demand was clear: leave. The beach house, he claimed, wasn't a place to stay anymore. The audacity wasn't just in the order, but in the confidence behind it, as if authority had been granted simply by marrying into the family. Humiliation burned quietly. A sister avoided eye contact. My husband sat still, saying nothing, which hurt more than the yelling. That silence revealed more than any argument could. It exposed where loyalty truly lived and where it didn't. Years of swallowed resentment suddenly made sense. The dismissive jokes, the financial advice, the way control always disguised itself as concern. No protest came. Calm replaced confrontation. Bags were gathered slowly, not in defeat, but in calculation. Every insult landed, every word remembered. The man doing the yelling mistook silence for surrender, never questioning why there was no fight. What he didn't know was how deeply the lies ran. The beach house wasn't his leverage. The money he bragged about wasn't fully his either, and the man who stayed quiet at the table had been hiding his own secrets. Debts masked as investments, promises broken behind closed doors, documents signed without understanding the consequences. That night, truths began surfacing. Calls were made, records were checked. By the time the tide shifted, so did the balance of power. The same man who shouted with certainty was about to face the reality he'd spent years avoiding. The next morning, the door he claimed ownership over no longer opened for him. And for the first time, the silence belonged to the right person. Family gatherings were always wrapped in smiles, the kind that looked warm from a distance but cut sharply up close. Laughter floated easily across the table, yet every compliment carried weight. Every pause felt measured. Jealousy lived comfortably there, hidden behind polite questions and forced toasts. It took years to realize how carefully everything had been arranged. My husband thrived in those spaces. His charm softened rooms, his voice carried authority, and his hand rested possessively on shoulders whenever conversations drifted toward money or ownership. Control was his language. Intimidation was his punctuation. Truth, however, was rarely invited to speak. When relatives praised his success, the nods came easily, never revealing the unpaid loans, the borrowed confidence, or the way accounts quietly moved when no one was watching. The betrayal didn't arrive all at once. It revealed itself in fragments. A comment from an aunt about an investment that sounded unfamiliar. A cousin asking why a signature appeared on paperwork that was never discussed. Smiles tightened. Eyes shifted. My husband brushed it all off with practiced ease, dismissing concerns as misunderstandings, framing questions as jealousy. What hurt most wasn't the deception, it was the realization of how long everyone had been playing a role. Family loyalty was conditional, support depended on who appeared strongest at the table, and strength, it seemed, was mistaken for volume and fear. Late one evening, after guests left and dishes sat untouched, the truth finally pressed forward. Bank statements didn't align. Dates didn't match stories. Transfers had been made under the assumption no one would ever look closely. The intimidation that worked so well in public failed in private, replaced by irritation, then anger, then silence. That silence said everything. The man who demanded respect had built it on lies. The confidence so admired was borrowed. The authority so loudly displayed relied entirely on ignorance staying intact. Once the numbers were clear, the smiles lost their power. By morning, documents were printed and conversations shifted. Relatives who once avoided eye contact suddenly asked careful questions. The man who controlled the room now avoided it, realizing exposure travels faster than intimidation ever could. Sometimes betrayal doesn't scream. It smiles, waits patiently, and then collapses under its own weight. Silence had always been misunderstood in this family. It was mistaken for weakness, for compliance, for fear. That misunderstanding became the greatest advantage of all. While voices rose around the dinner table and accusations were thrown carelessly into the air, nothing was said. Every insult, every boast, every threat was absorbed without reaction, quietly cataloged for later. My husband mistook that calm for surrender. He spoke louder, leaned closer, and used intimidation the way others used logic. He believed power lived in who controlled the conversation. What he never noticed was how often stories shifted, how details changed depending on the audience, how money appeared and disappeared without explanation. Silence created space to observe, and in that space, the truth grew impossible to ignore. Late nights became moments of clarity. Screens glowed softly while financial records told stories his words never could. Accounts opened without discussion, transfers justified as temporary, signatures placed where trust had been assumed, not earned. Each discovery tightened something in the chest. Not anger yet, but resolve. The betrayal wasn't sudden, it was layered, deliberate, and hidden behind years of confident smiles. Family members played their roles well. Some suspected, others benefited. No one asked questions because no one wanted the answers. My husband counted on that. He relied on discomfort to protect him, on the belief that silence meant ignorance. Every time intimidation ended a conversation, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. There was no confrontation, no dramatic reveal, just patience. Documents were copied, timelines were traced, names were connected in ways they were never meant to be. The more he talked, the more careless he became. Arrogance has a way of loosening tongues, especially when it believes it has already won. The moment arrived quietly, a single conversation with the right person, papers placed gently on a table, questions asked without accusation, only curiosity. The reaction was immediate. Confusion turned to concern. Concern turned to scrutiny. Suddenly, the man who controlled every room wasn't in it. When he finally realized what was happening, intimidation no longer worked. There was nothing left to threaten, no story strong enough to cover the evidence. Silence met him instead, cold, informed, and final. Some battles are won without raising a voice, and some truths destroy louder than any scream ever could. Night has a way of sharpening truth. What began as shouting echoed long after the house went quiet, replaying in every corner. The man who raised his voice believed the damage was already done, that humiliation settled things. Confidence poured off him as if volume alone had rewritten reality. He went to bed certain of his power, unaware that arrogance creates blind spots no amount of control can cover. Sleep never came. Instead, pieces finally aligned. Messages once dismissed as insignificant suddenly made sense. Dates matched transactions that were never explained. Excuses unraveled when placed side by side. The calm on the surface hid a storm of realization underneath. This wasn't recklessness, it was design. Money had been moved deliberately. Names were used without permission. Trust was treated like a resource to be drained. My husband's secrets were never meant to survive scrutiny. They depended on fear, on silence, on the assumption no one would dare look too closely. That night, everything was looked at. Emails confirmed what instincts had whispered for years. Contracts revealed obligations never disclosed. Even the beach house dispute traced back to leverage he never legally held. As darkness thinned into early morning, phone calls were made. Not emotional, not desperate, just precise. The right people were contacted before excuses could be prepared. Documents were shared before stories could be adjusted. By the time the sun edged above the horizon, the narrative he controlled was no longer his to tell. He woke up expecting obedience. Instead, he found distance. The tone shifted instantly. The same voice that once intimidated now stumbled over explanations. Questions came calmly, each one backed by evidence. There was nowhere to redirect blame, no one left to silence. Family members who once deferred now watched carefully. Allies disappeared the moment truth entered the room. The man who dominated conversations couldn't finish a sentence without being corrected. Power doesn't vanish loudly. It drains away, unnoticed, until panic replaces certainty. By mid-morning, the consequences were unavoidable. Accounts were frozen pending review. Legal boundaries were clarified. Ownership was proven. The shouting from the night before sounded ridiculous in the light of facts. What once felt threatening now felt small. The mask didn't fall all at once. It cracked, then split, then collapsed entirely under the weight of its own lies. The same confidence that once filled rooms now couldn't survive a single document. By sunrise, everything had changed, and the loudest voice learned that exposure ends arguments faster than anger ever could. If this story hit close to home, you're not alone, and you're in the right place. Every story shared here is a reminder that silence isn't weakness, and patience can be the sharpest weapon of all. Power shifts when truth comes out, and masks always fall eventually. If you want more stories filled with hidden betrayals, shocking revelations, and unforgettable moments where control slips away, make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Take a second to like this video. It helps these stories reach others who need them. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because the next story may reveal a secret even darker than this one. Until next time, remember, those who shout the loudest are often the first to fall when the truth finally speaks.